Waters' Latin American tour came amid growing geostrategic tensions in the region. U.S. imperialism seized domination of Latin America, which has forged growing economic relations with China at the expense of the U.S., as indispensable to its global drive to war. Earlier this month, because we want to steal their resources, and we want to keep them from providing those resources to China, like soybeans, for example. China. Remember, well, thanks to Trump and his tariffs, China started buying soybeans from Brazil, and they used to pretty much exclusively buy them from us, and he destroyed the soybean trade in this country.
Yep.
Earlier this month, this was expressed in diplomatic provocations staged by Israeli government with the full support of the Biden administration against the government of Brazilian President Lula, which we know with the aim of pressuring Brazil to align itself with the war against Gaza and the U.S. war preparations against Iran. Also trying to get them in line on Ukraine, and Lula has slowly bent the knee over time.
Mm-hmm.
Despite the criticism of Israel's war on Gaza by nominally left-wing presidents in Latin America, including Colombia's Gustavo Petro, Chile's Gabriel Boric, and Lula himself, they have played a politically criminal role in covering up for the Biden administration, particularly its unrestricted support for Israel. Who better to hold Biden accountable than the people that he's propped up over time? If they're not going to challenge him on this, on genocide, we know what's going on. Significantly, none of them has spoken out against the censorship campaign against Roger Waters in Latin America. Well, we all know who they serve too. In Brazil, this had already been anticipated by the Lula government's response at the end of May. Now, they did not ban, by the way, him from his hotel rooms. That's the one country. He was actually staying in Brazil and flying via helicopter into those other countries to perform for that day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
which is a whole other
money.
Which is a whole other customs headache, by the way. Right? Of course, it had already been anticipated by Lula government's response at the end of May. They had a petition to prevent him from entering Brazil, which was signed by a representative of the Israeli Confederation of Brazil. Notice they have Israel has offices set up in every country around the world to ensure that their narrative is followed. It's really fucked up. Lula's justice manager, Flavio Dino, reportedly assured a member of the Supreme Court that Waters would be arrested if he, quote, wears a Nazi uniform at a concert in Brazil. Waters has used this character in his performances over the last 4 decades to denounce fascism, but it has been deliberately misrepresented, even as ruling class circles themselves turn toward fascism in response to the growing opposition in the working class. I think they don't want him letting their secret out. Even though they all watch
the wall.
They don't want him letting their secret out. This is what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Since this episode, representatives of the Lula government's Justice Ministry have held several meetings with the members of the organization, which has been carrying out a sordid campaign to equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. Wow, they might as well be lobbying U.S. Congress and silence opposition to the Palestinian genocide. Last week, CONIB obtained an injunction ordering the deletion of several social media posts made by Breno Altman, himself a journalist of Jewish background who's a member of the PT and a critic of Israel's actions on Gaza. Because they don't have free speech laws. Right, self-hating Jew. Or just like me.
Mm-hmm.
All Latin American governments work under the fundamental premise of defending capitalist interests and big corporations in the region, and will work with all necessary methods to prevent the demonstrations of millions against the war in Gaza from taking organized form in the Latin American working class. Imagine 1 million people on the streets of Sao Paulo protesting. What would be happening here? That's Lula's nightmare. That crashed. What the entire Latin American ruling elite fears is that the growing protests against the genocide in Gaza will fuel a broad radicalization of the working class and youth. Many Latin American countries are home to large Arab Palestinian communities who along with the masses of workers and young people, have watched with horror Israel's criminal bombardment of hospitals and refugee camps in Gaza. The censorship of pro-Palestinian views and demonstrations in Latin America is also critical for imperialist governments as they confront massive protests in the advanced capitalist countries and fear that the taking to the streets of millions worldwide will develop into a unified struggle internationally. This is precisely what needs to happen as part of building an anti-war movement led by the working class.